Laura Joseph is an animal behavioral specialist and owner of an educational and training facility called the Animal Behavior Center in Ohio. She presents at workshops, universities, zoos, travels, lectures, and consults focusing on positive reinforcement interactions and modifying behavior through applications in behavioral analysis. Absolutely delighted to speak with you today, Laura. Thank you so much for tapping in with me.
Yeah, it's an honor, Lance. Thanks for asking me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So, as an animal behavioral specialist who specializes in applied behavioral analysis, how important is it for you to build a good rapport and a strong relationship with each animal at the Animal Behavioral Center in management care or inside of your clients' homes?
It's extremely important, especially if the animal's at my center. If the animal's at my center, it's there for a reason. And it's usually because there's a behavior concern. When I take an animal in at center, it's usually for longer terms. Some are permanent residents, some are temporary, just until I can get a behavior change.
Sure.
But it's extremely important. I mean, I always tell all the employees, before you even put your hand on that doorknob to walk into another room, think about what you're doing, because as soon as that doorknob turns, you're already training the animal. And the key question is, what are you training it to do?
Right.
So I work with a lot of different species of animals. Very rarely will I go into anybody's homes anymore, just because, I mean, I got into virtual teaching, education years before the pandemic.
Right.
And I found that there was a difference. I mean, a lot of the species of animals I train are exotic, so if I were to walk into somebody's house, the animal, what I had found out, would act differently than, say, if I met with them via Zoom and I could see the animal over their shoulder.
Sure.
Because as soon as I walk in, there's something new in their environment. And a lot of times I found I wasn't seeing the real behavior. I just heard about it afterwards on a phone call when the animal was comfortable after I had left. So, but yeah, building strong relationships, I mean, that's what got me into the work that I do. I was focused on enrichment, and then I just wanted to empower animals, and that's how I got into training. Is I found that using applied behavior analysis and positive reinforcement training really empowered and enriched the animal's life. And that's how I ended up getting into the field of training and behavior modification.
Just love that. Very insightful and meaningful dialogue. So does assessing behavior start with watching and observing the animal before you start any training session?
Yeah, or listening. A lot of times I'm listening, like if the animal exhibits the behavior concern but won't do it in front of you, a lot of times, I mean, I'm always listening. Even if my back is on that animal, I'm listening for behavior. So sometimes I watch them over cameras, because just the sight of a person can be the stressor. And that's, I mean, I deal with a lot of exotic animals and from an array of different backgrounds. So in order to get a good read on what behavior I'm looking at, I need to watch, like, when it's happening, when isn't it happening, what's changing in the environment when it's happening, when it's not happening. So yeah, for me, a lot of it is observational and listening.
Exactly. There's definitely many advantages of observing, but, you know, also listening and accurately interpreting animal communication, as you know. But can you expand a little further or deeper about how a trusting relationship helps with animal training?
Well, I guess you have to define what is trust, you know. But once, I mean, some of the animals I work with, just this, like I said, the sight of a person or a person they don't know, can be a real stressor to the animal. So I just start, you know, observing identifying positive reinforcers, and then I pair myself with those positive reinforcers, and then pretty soon, just the opportunity to interact with me becomes a positive reinforcer for the animal. So, yeah, I mean, that's why I do what I do, because I love the relationship, the trusting relationship it builds with the animal.
Definitely have to build or establish a relationship of trust to, you know, and to effectively train. In your career of working with animals that exhibited lunging or animals who attacked people or other animals, how do you use your observational or listening or experimental techniques for stress management?
Well, you know, a lot of the animals that I work with can be very dangerous very fast, especially if you don't understand what the behavior is that you're looking at, the lunging.
Right.
You know, I work with a lot of birds too, so you don't want to ignore those behaviors because they mean something to the animal. And if you can't identify that the animals are exhibiting these behaviors because they're fearful of your proximity, then you're going to reinforce the very the behavior you're trying to change. So I have to watch when undesired behaviors are happening, and I need to try to identify why they're happening. And a lot of times I don't know why they're happening in the beginning, but I'll figure that out through training.
Right.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, definitely. So in order to improve an animal's behavior and welfare through, you know, your behavioral modification programs, do you need to know exactly what the behavior is, why it is happening, for you to effectively intervene and change the animal's emotional response? Let's say for, you know, SIB, self-injury behaviors, or aggressive animal behavior. Are there animals that have come into your animal behavior center, you know, in an extremely anxious state, critical condition, where you thought, you know, animal trainers or handlers has no more room for a mistake? If you kind of get what I'm saying here.
I do. That's a lot of question. But yes, like I was just saying, sometimes I don't know what certain behaviors mean because I work with such a wide variety of species of exotic animals. Sometimes I'll work with species of animal that I've never worked with before. I will listen to what people tell me that they, you know, the history of the animal and their observation, but I'm really careful with relying on that information because so many times, Lance, as you may know, you start interacting with the animal and I'm like, I'm not seeing this at all. This is not, you know, the label that I'm seeing. Sometimes it takes me a while to understand what the behavior is I'm looking at, what I'm observing. But I end up finding out what it is through training. You know, like, say, for example, if I can train with a target stick, I will do that for numerous different reasons. And one is to put distance between myself and the animal in case I misread a behavior I was looking at that I thought was calm, and then all of a sudden the animal lunges. I don't want to make that mistake, but I make mistakes, and I just make sure I'm learning from them and make sure I do not repeat them. And when I'm working with more intense behavior issues that could easily be labeled as dangerous, aggressive, I want as little interaction with other people for that animal to have other than me. It's usually that animal comes in, I'll be like, this is hands off. Absolutely nobody goes near this animal but everybody that works for me is very involved in behavior training, observational skills, enrichment. So it'll just be myself interacting with that animal until I can find a point where okay, it's time to bring in somebody else. But I want to make sure, I'm doing that right now with a pair of giraffes.
Right.
I want to make sure that that other trainer, we're doing things as similar as possible, so as to not confuse the animal. But yeah, in the work that I do, especially with exotics, because most of the exotics that I'm working with are in cages, enclosures. So when they're in cages and enclosures, their choices are already limited. And then you stick a fearful animal in an enclosure, you're restricting its choices, its opportunity to get away.
Yes.
So I found that a lot of animals, especially in unenriched environments, are more susceptible to abnormal repetitive behaviors, self-injurious behaviors, and if you can prevent that self-injurious behavior from starting in the first place,
right?
You do, or if because if you can't modify some of these issues, they can turn into self-injurious behaviors. And then once you have that, sometimes the injurious behaviors just start advancing till they are now medical issues.
Yeah.
So not only are you dealing with, a behavior that the animal's harming itself, now it's turned into a medical condition. And, if you can't get and train for those medical and husbandry behaviors that you need, I don't want to be forcing the animal to have to take a medication and then me turn around and try to train it using positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean, in the work that I do, there is a lot of abnormal repetitive behaviors, a lot of self-injurious behaviors. And the longer those behaviors go, that's a form of stress relief for the animal. So I need to remove the stress as fast as possible to prevent that behavior from getting any stronger. And usually you can tell with the more well-practiced, the abnormal repetitive behavior, usually the longer the history of reinforcement for that behavior. But doesn't mean you can't change it, because you can. It just might take longer.
And when you say preventing it from happening in the very first place, you're providing like an enrichment inside that enclosure?
Yeah, if I can.
Yeah.
Because a lot of abnormal repetitive behaviors develop due to lack of appropriate individualized enrichment. So, yeah, I mean, studies show that the animal's preferred form of enrichment is positive reinforcement training.
Right.
And that, you see that on a daily basis. I see it numerous times a day. But I can't always be there.
Yeah.
So if I can't always be there, one of the first things we do a lot of times before we even really begin more intense training is provide enrichment in some form or another. And usually it's foraging, because I can't always be there training the animals. So, and I've seen animals get frustrated when the training session ends. So I usually try to redirect behavior onto some type of foraging enrichment device, so I can exit the enclosure or the room without adding frustration to the animal's environment.
Right, completely understand. And how important is a well-designed reinforcement system when training animals?
I wouldn't say it's important. I would say it's absolutely necessary.
Yes.
Yes. And I tell people, especially my employees, don't ever ask for a behavior from an animal if you don't have an identified positive reinforcement at that time.
Exactly. Because
how are you going to reinforce, you get a desired behavior, how are you going to make sure it keeps happening if you haven't identified reinforcers yet? And a lot of times that comes through, I'll identify reinforcers by just observing the animal from a distance.
Right.
What is it picking out of its dish? What item specifically? And then what size is that item? And then usually the only thing I have to work with when I start my initial training with an animal is food items.
Right.
Because the opportunity to be with me isn't a reinforcer yet.
And your animals are on a continuous reinforcement schedule?
No. Mm-mm. You mean my animals?
Yeah.
No, I mean, in the beginning when I'm training and I'm shaping, and it will be on a continuous schedule reinforcement.
Yeah.
But then I've got to move it to an intermittent schedule of reinforcement to make it stronger, build duration.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I can't be, I mean, I think I have 18 animals currently in my building right now.
Right.
So,
sure.
Yeah, once the behavior is established, then I will move it to an intermittent schedule.
Absolutely. So true, 100% on point. What do long delays without reinforcement do when training, or when trying to accomplish a behavioral change with a fearful or anxious animal?
Long delays, that pushes like ratio strain. I find that long delays without reinforcement can actually reinforce the undesired behavior we're trying to change.
Yes.
So I don't like, once you begin understanding the animal, and you do that through training, you can tell when you start pushing those boundaries.
Yes.
We're not at that length of time, that duration yet. There's more shaping that needs to be done. And you'll either see, you'll start reinforcing the very behavior you're trying to change.
Right. Or
you'll see other undesirable behaviors start happening. And undesirable to me means anything that stresses that animal. Because I myself will get very anxious when I'm watching an animal under a lot of stress. It's really hard for me to observe. Even if the animal can't see you. I mean, I remember watching and filming an animal. Oh, it was tough, mutilating itself.
Wow.
But I was trying to define a baseline. When is this happening? When isn't it happening? How long is it happening? How much work do I need to be doing here? But those instances are some of our best teachers as trainers. When I first started studying applied behavior analysis, I was volunteering my time at a wildlife rehabilitation center, and I often say some of the, I don't want to say the hardest animals to train, but the ones that require so much specific attention are animals that were once in the wild and now are injured. So, in the field of wildlife rehabilitation, you have your choices. When that animal comes in, you either rehabilitate it and release it, which you want little human interaction as possible. You have to either find it a different facility, euthanize it, or use it as that animal becomes an ambassador for that species. So some of the, I want to say, the more challenging cases I've ever taken on are wild animals that have come in and have a permanent injury, cannot be released, and it now needs to be an education animal. This is an animal that, has lived 7 years in the wild, and it's learned to stay as far away from humans as possible, and now it's surrounded by them. So those have been some of my best teachers. Right. To try to change behavior and get that high amount of stress out of their environment.
Most definitely.
Sorry, I feel like that went on really long.
No. It was a great elaboration. How do you typically arrange or manipulate the environment to make more desirable behaviors more easier than undesirable behaviors?
I will especially if I'm working with a fearful animal, an animal that's fearful of humans. What I like to do is get the enclosure set up I'll watch the animal, how it interacts in its enclosure now. And then based on what behaviors I'm seeing and where the animal goes in that enclosure, when it's comfortable, what it's doing, I'll design a new enclosure and usually have food and water dishes right within reach of opening that door. So I can, there's as little stress as possible. I will provide areas where it can retreat to when it tells me it's had enough. It's done. This session's over. And usually I don't want to push an animal to that point, but sometimes when I first interact, I don't know what those points are until I start interacting.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. What kind of adjustments, let's see here, you kind of answered that. Actually, what kind of adjustments do you make to set up an environment, animal owners for success, so the owner is no longer unintentionally reinforcing undesirable behaviors?
See if I can answer that question.
Yeah.
Usually it starts with educating the person.
Right.
A lot of, in the companion animal community, me, from what I see, a lot of the number one reasons that shelters exist in the first place is because the owners, the caretakers, the keepers do not understand their role and how they're having or training that undesired behavior to exist in the first place. So you've got to educate the keepers, the caretakers, so they understand what they're doing, how they can change it, and also not offend that keeper while you're trying to tell them. So, applied behavior analysis works across species.
Yes.
So I use it with the people that I'm interacting with that are caring for these animals, and if I can provide them education in a respectful way, then they're more likely to listen and try to change, because as you know, Lance, in order to get to that animal, you've got to get to the person first.
Absolutely. Not just having, empathy and compassion for the animal, but also for the owner.
Because if you offend, depending on how you talk to that person, if you offend them, whether you realize it or not, boom, they're already they're turning off what they're listening to. And then your opportunity to help that animal has just disappeared.
So true. Okay, so can you explain why it's a necessity to break down behavior into simple components and discrete causes, and why it's important to start with smaller approximations to desirable behaviors and reinforce those small approximations when training animals?
Yeah, so shaping. Shaping, and everything is about shaping. Everything. Yes. And some people have asked me, what's the number one mistake you see trainers make? And a trainer is anybody. It's anybody that animal can see, hear, smell, or feel. I always say, based on my experience, like the number one mistake people make, whether they realize it or not, is taking too big steps in their shaping plan. So shaping is extremely important, and I get told a lot of times, boy, you must have so much patience to do this. And I'm really not a patient person. I can be very impatient. But when it comes to animals' health and welfare, and their setting up their future for success so they can thrive, what I'm looking for is ever so slight changes in behavior, whether that's a slight shift of the animal's weight to the right, to the left. Those are all things I'm looking for when I'm shaping and really breaking things down, because when I see that, if I'm trying to get the animal to walk up to me, to fly up to me, to crawl up to me, I look for that slight shift in weight, and boom, that's my reinforcer that, yep. We are on our way, you know.
Yeah.
And even if it happens, even if it takes sessions, weeks,
yes.
you know, when I break down behavior change in really small, observable terms, that's my reinforcer that I'm on the right track. We're moving in the right direction.
Love that. That's very, very, very interesting. So what happens if animals are stuck indoors, in backyards, in stagnant environments with no exercise, socialization, mental, emotional, physical stimulations? What kind of behaviors have you seen develop in your experience of working with animals?
That are raised in stagnant environments? Yeah. Abnormal repetitive behaviors. Those are, I mean, when I first really got into behavior, that was my main interest, was working with animals with abnormal repetitive behaviors due to stagnant environments, due to people not knowing better or jumping in. And, I mean, in the world of exotic animals, Lance, with companion animals, a lot of times you bring exotics into your house.
Yeah.
People initially bring them in because they're different, they're unique, but there's a reason.
Right.
You know, most people don't understand their needs, and then they find these behavior issues develop because they don't understand the animal's needs, the individual, not appropriate space. And one of the main things I always tell people is keep your animal used to change. Do not let it sit in a stagnant environment, because
love that.
Not only will it start behavior issues, what's it doing to the mental health of that animal? So, unfortunately, in the world of exotics, you'll see a lot of abnormal repetitive behaviors from needs not being met. So my goal is to change those behaviors so those needs are being met. And, you know, every behavior happens for a reason. And I'm a stickler about saying desired and undesired behavior, because I'm like, desired by whom? Undesired by whom? By you or by the animal? Because the animal is exhibiting that behavior because it serves a purpose.
Right.
It may not be desirable by us, but if it keeps happening, it's being reinforced. Why?
Right.
And if that animal's mental and physical health is on the line, that is my main mission, is to change those undesired behaviors. Because undesired by me, because I see it bringing on stress for the animal. And I know with a lot of the species that I work with, the abnormal repetitive behaviors due to stagnant environments are just overwhelming. It can come in the form of constantly licking walls.
Yes.
A lot of primates poking themselves in the eye, or poking themselves in areas that you don't want them poking themselves in.
Yes.
Because it's some type of stress reliever for them. And if their environment is not enriched, and they don't have objects to turn those behaviors to, the only thing they have is their own body.
Yes.
So a lot of times it turns into over grooming, over preening, and then sores start to develop.
So true.
And then they'll start picking at the sores.
Yes.
And then you got a medical issue.
So true. So true.
Yeah.
I just I was working with an animal, and you know, I walked into the house and it was excessively licking like windows, like nonstop. And that was from, you know, husky, you know, lack of mental, you know, emotional, physical stimulation, environmental enrichment on a, you know, continuous basis, not just, you know, in the backyard, but like, you know, outside, you know, on trails and beaches. And so I'm actually going to help a lot more with this dog now. And yeah, But
and you know, like I'm picturing this as you're talking about the dog leaving the window.
Yeah.
And it could be, it usually doesn't catch people's attention until it becomes an inconvenience for the person.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Or, you know, this behavior developed out of nowhere.
Yeah.
No, it didn't. It's probably started, had other antecedents that you just didn't recognize. And something that will worry me is, okay, yes, this behavior is happening on this substrate at this point, but I'm afraid of it start generalizing to different areas, to different objects.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So right there it comes again, you know, a lot of times the owners, the keepers, the caretakers do not understand what they're looking at.
Yeah, and so true, and it's as an older person too. You know what I mean? They don't have the ability to really to do it themselves. So that's why I'm very happy that they've reached out to me, and we can. You know, I just immediately took the dog right in the backyard and started shaping it immediately, and now we're gonna start building it. You know, from one environment to another environment, but stagnant environments is very real, and thanks for elaborating on that.
And studies also show with predictability comes boredom. You know, and we can get, as trainers, we can get stuck training the same old thing to the animal, and that's stagnant. That becomes stagnant. You know, that becomes boring. It's predictable.
Yeah.
So it's important to increase complexities, at the animal's pace and empower them.
Yes.
You know, the more complex the more complex the environment, the more choices there are for the animal to make, the more sense of control they feel they have. You know, but also taking too big of steps in too busy or distracting of an environment can bring on a lot of stress.
Sure.
The animal doesn't know what to do with all this information.
Exactly. And I think that's why, I'm gonna kind of, starting in the backyard, moving towards, baseball field, a little bigger enclosure, a high school football field, you know what I mean? High school football field, kind of going to the trail. But, if we have to take steps back, we might have to take steps back. If we can take steps forward, it's, you know what I mean? It's being very slow, kind of at the animal's pace, not my pace, the animal's learning, not my learning, it's, but the dog definitely. Now, it does have engagement. You know what I mean? She's definitely she's a great owner. She's just, this dog just needs more outdoors. You know what I mean? More sniffing, tracking. Hiking. You know what I mean? Sprinting, socialization. You know what I mean? So you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I live with a deaf and blind border collie.
Yes,
I do understand.
Yes. And. Border collie. I love all dogs, but I love the movement and the speed of a border collie. It's just so fascinating. I have one in my program. I've had another one previously in my program. Bless his heart, he has cancer. He recently got one of his legs amputated, but he was in our program for like 9 years, and he exceptional, just recall. But his speed was like, I swear, I was faster than a greyhound. It was like 45 miles an hour. I would take him down to, kind of by San Francisco. It's called South Rodeo Beach. And his locomotion off the shoreline was just like, it was just pure grace. And it's just so fascinating to watch animals, you know what I mean? In that moment. Yes.
Yeah, I love watching my border collie, how she uses her feet.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
She uses her feet so more intricately than my other dogs. How she will use her feet to manipulate objects, to hold objects.
Yes.
It's neat to watch.
Yeah, it's and their like agility, their how they turn like the Daytona 500. They're just quick. They're just, you know what I mean? Real, these other dogs are fast. They got good movement, but it's something unique about it. They're just how they can turn so quick, like on a drop of a dime, and like juke the other dog, and as you're watching them play, they're just so it's just all inspiring. Yes.
Yeah.
So we're gonna let's see here. As you're speaking of deaf dogs. Let's see here. So what, as far as what kind of advice, in our last question here, what kind of advice can you give to someone that just recently adopted, a deaf dog? What kind of advice could you give them to help them have a more deeper understanding of their animal?
Train it.
Yes.
That's how we understand them. I've had people ask me before, I don't have a good relationship with this dog and I want to increase the relationship. How do I do that? I'm like, train it.
Mm-hmm.
But with deaf dogs, I have a soft spot for special needs animals. I do not like calling them disabilities because, I work with a lot of animals that can be labeled as that. There's adaptation is an amazing thing to observe. It's an amazing thing to experience. Deaf dogs, when I'm working with people with deaf dogs, so many times people will be like, oh, I can't do it. I can't take on a deaf dog.
Yeah.
To me, Lance, working with deaf dogs is so much easier than working with dogs that can hear. Because there's one less distraction. They, Quincy, my Rottweiler that I just put down, she taught my other two. I have a deaf Old English Bulldog and a deaf and blind Border Collie. Just watching how they all adapted and how Quincy was Snow's eyes and Quincy was Levi's ears and
yes.
Even if the animal can see, even if the animal can hear, they're learning information from their environment, whether they can hear you or not. So with deaf dogs, they're more in tune with feelings such as vibrations and anything visual. My deaf dog looks in mirrors all the time because he's looking at what's going on behind him, what he can't hear happening behind him. It's just amazing to watch him adapt to. He rearranges himself in the environment so he can see, because that's how he's gathering information. But when working with people with deaf dogs, once you show them simple hand gestures, or sit, come, watch my eyes, I think a lot of people just because lack of information makes them nervous.
Yes.
And once they see how to train a deaf dog, it's special, because that animal's communicating through you via watching your, AKA, body language, behavior, which way your feet just moved. Those are all cues to the dog of, oh, we're going this way now, watching your shadow. I use shadows with deaf dogs a lot, that if they have their back to me, I'll use a shadow to get their attention. But a lot of times with deaf dogs, one of the first things I'm going to train as a deaf dog is to look at me. Because in the for the next 15 years of your life, that's how you're going to, I want you looking at me, because then I can give you, a visual signal with my hands or whatever of, we're going this way now, come to me, so with deaf dogs, they can't hear you, so I always train them to look at me and look at me in new environments. So I'll slowly change those environments. Okay, here's something new in the environment, or here's a new environment. What is the first thing I want trained is that dog turning and looking at me for, am I good to go? And, usually my hands up in the air, shaking like a party. Yep, let's go party, deaf dog gets out close to traffic, you know, if I've trained it in slowly shaping, changing environments, first thing to do is look at me. Yes. Because if there's a dangerous situation getting ready to happen, I need that dog looking at me so I can say, let's go this way.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. It's so true. I mean, as you're aware, I had passed away from cancer, was Tartuffe, who was a white boxer, but that, you know, Karen, my fiance, watched me, the level of resiliency in anywhere and everywhere, any environment.
Was he deaf?
He was deaf, yeah. And he would check in and take him to the beach, take him, but like you're saying, you know, in our neighborhood, you know, where there's cars and everything, he could walk right next to her on the side of the curb, next to cars, and he would check in. It was just so, I mean, I learned from him. I've learned from him and more than, I mean, I've learned from a lot of dogs and animals, but what I've learned from him has helped me train every dog. You know, it's...
He was a good educator.
Yes. I mean, his education, how he was so, the level of check-ins and resiliency in any environment, changing environments, but Karen's the one that, you know, shaped out that behavior and put in that work. But his compassion for people, like, I remember one time I was in extreme stomach pain, and he came and comforted me and just like he was there for me, like, just like, and then at that time in my life, like, to have that type of animal with that type of contact, comfort, and unconditional love for a human was very profound. And
he understood you.
Yes, exactly.
He knew you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was,
yeah, and that's like, I was just thinking about this conversation the other day. Snow is our deaf and blind border collie that we drove down from Ohio to North Carolina to adopt, because I was just like, she's going to be a fabulous teacher. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
right,
I had never trained a deaf and blind animal before. And I was like, she is going to educate me in ways I can't even imagine. And she has. And I remember the weekend before my husband and I drove down to pick her up. We adopted her at 11 weeks. I remember sitting at dinner with somebody, and I told them we were going to go adopt a deaf and blind dog. And their response was, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just put the animal down?
Yeah.
And I didn't want to offend her, but obviously she didn't understand. You know, I just told her, I said, adaptation is an amazing thing.
Right.
And, you know, I think a lot of people probably would have some people probably would have put her down because when you don't know better, you can't do better.
Exactly.
And if you were to see Snow right now, I mean, when people come in this house and walk into the center, they are fascinated watching her because she doesn't bump into anything.
Yes,
she knows where everything is.
Right.
You know, and she's the one, before I put my Rottweiler down about a month ago, Snow was the one that usually alerted me that somebody was in our parking lot. That is a dog that cannot hear and cannot see. Mm-hmm. It's because her sense of smell, you know, another sense that has adapted because she's missing two of them. She doesn't know she's missing. She doesn't know life anymore.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes, yes.
As far as she knows, no animal can see her.
Yeah.
But her sense of smell
was,
it's funny because I'll see the UPS man come in and I'll be like, watch Snow. She's going to start barking in about 5 seconds.
Yes.
Depending on how strong the wind
is.
So she alerts me when somebody's here.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, it's so true. Like, down the street about, you know, coming into Pacheco Valley where I live, Tartuffe would start going to the front door about a mile when Karen was about a half a mile away. And he would be at the front door. And next thing you know, within 30 seconds, the garage door starts opening.
Isn't that amazing?
And he just, so I was just like, okay, I got to clean the house real quick, or I got to do the dishes real quick. I got, you know what I mean? I got to expedite the process. Yeah. But the sense of smell was just, like you're saying, was just on a whole nother level. Like, yeah, most definitely. Yep. Very, very interesting. Amazing. Yes, very interesting information here, and thanks for sharing that information with me. We're officially coming to an end here, but it's fair to say that the ultimate test of truly understanding positive reinforcement principles and applied behavioral analysis is not just how we practice it with animals that we are working with, but how we practice it on a daily basis with one another. So I truly appreciate you and your time and educating with me and helping me. Until next time, humbly and sincerely, thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you, Lance. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's an honor.
Yes, definitely.
And thank you for all the amazing work you do, because I do watch you. I watch some of your posts.
Yes.
You know?